Crafters. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use the products from my new collection called Teacup Fairies to create a stunning pop-up card. Let's jump right to the card making process, and I'll be explaining the new products along the way. So we are going to start by creating a card base, and for this I'm going to use one of the papers from my new patterned paper pad. The papers are A5 format, that is 8 1/4 by 5 3/4, and I'll be using this one that has a frame of mushrooms and flowers. Now I have to cut this paper in half, so I'm first folding that in half and just pinching at one side to define the center. Then I'm also using a pen just to make it more visible, and then I'm using the paper trimmer to cut it. Then you are going to need a sheet of white cardstock to create a card base. So first I'm applying some adhesive onto one of the papers, and I'm going to stick it down onto my cardstock, leaving just a tiny border along the two sides. Next, I'm going to bring that paper to the paper trimmer again, and I'm going to trim off another side again, leaving that thin white border. This method is going to allow me to create a card base without pre-measuring anything. And now it's time to create the fold. So I'm going to bring my cardstock with the half background into the scoring board, and I'm going to create a score line right along the edge of the patterned paper. The idea here is that the patterned paper comes right to the fold, but it's not going to overlap it, and this way you can open and close the card easily. The next step is actually creating another fold line at 1/8 of an inch from the first fold line. This is what I call a double fold, and it's going to allow me to add more bulk inside the card. Now I'm just going to attach another half of the patterned paper right next to the fold, just symmetrical to the first one. And then I'm going to use the paper trimmer again and trim off the extra cardstock, again leaving a thin white border. Now I'm just going to fold the cardstock along the two crease lines, and that is going to create that double fold, and the two halves of the card will be identical without pre-measuring. And as always, the tools and supplies that I'm using are listed down below in the description box, as well as on my blog. Now I'm going to finish off the outside of the card, and then we'll move to the inside. So I have pre-cut a piece of purple cardstock to the size of the card base, just a tiny bit smaller again to leave that border, and now I'm placing it into my Ivy embossing folder and sending it through the die cutting machine. The embossing folder is actually from one of the previous collection, but I think it matches the fairy theme perfectly. So I'm applying some adhesive onto one side of the embossed panel, and then I'm going to attach it to the card front. Then I'm going to use the same pattern paper that I used for the inside. There are 4 papers of each design in that pad, and I'm just placing it onto the paper, framing the portion of the pattern that I like the best. And as you can see, I already used a next larger die to die cut a plain white circle. So now when I've die cut both circles, I'm going to layer the patterned paper one onto the plain white one. Now all I have to do is just stamp out the sentiment, and I'll be using the one from the Timeless Tea Set stamp set, also from the new collection. It goes you, me, and a cup of tea. Now I'm simply applying some blue ink, and I'm going to stamp it into the circle right above the flowers and the mushrooms. And now obviously I'm applying some double-sided tape onto that circle and I'm going to stick it down onto the card front. I'm going to keep the card front quite simple because all the fun is happening inside the card. So next I'm going to add a 3D pop-up element right in the center inside that flower and mushroom frame. And to create that 3D element, I'll be using the set of dies that is called Timeless Tea-Set Pop-Up Die Set. These 3 larger elements are meant to create the 3D teacup. This is the spoon, obviously, and that octagon is the base of the teacup. There are also a bunch of smaller flower and leaf shapes that you can use to decorate the cup. To begin with, I've die cut the doily out of plain white cardstock, the same one that I used for the card base. Then for the cup, I'm going to use one of the papers from the pad again, since all of them are coordinating, and I think that this delicate floral pattern is great for creating China teaware. So now I'm just placing the die over the piece of paper and the handle as well, and then I'm going to send it out through the die cutting machine. When I have the main shape die cut, I'm going to cut out the handle image as well as that insert die that you can see one more time, since I'm going to need 2 of those. Notice that I flipped over the paper when I was die cutting the handle for the second time, and this way I can have a mirror image of the handle. Now for this particular project, I will have to cut the octagonal base in half along that slit in the middle. I need to do that so that the cup will fit over the double fold of my card base. And now let's assemble the cup. I will start with the handle, and as you can notice, the die is creating 2 tabs at the top and at the bottom of the handle. So I'm folding them down, and then I'm going to apply some glue and stick the 2 handles back to back, and this way it's going to be double-sided. Then I'm going to attach the handle to the cup, and there are 2 small slits that are also created by the die. I'm putting the 2 tabs together and I'm feeding them through those slits, and then I'm going to open up the tabs at the wrong side and stick them down with the liquid glue. Now when the handle is attached, I can fold all the crease lines that are created by the die. And I'm also going to fold the bottom tabs outwards. There is a little trick on how to fold down this cup, but it's going to help you a lot. The first thing that you would want to do is to simply stick down that tab right here, but in case you move it just a little bit to one side, the cup is not going to fold down properly. So what you need to do is to simply lay down that cup flat on your table surface and fold it in half like that, just along the side where the handle is attached. Then I'm going to apply some adhesive onto that tab and I'm going to stick it down, but all that time I'm holding the die cut against the flat surface. That's the key. Now when we have assembled the cup this way, it's going to open up and close perfectly flat. And now let's attach the cup onto the doily. For this I'm going to need those 2 tabs at the bottom. So I'm simply feeding them through the slits in the doily that are created by the die, and then I'm going to stick them down at the bottom side. Here I have to mention that there are more ways of using this die set, and I'm going to demonstrate a couple of them in my next video. This is what the cup looks like at the moment, but you might want to know what that weird shape is for. Well, this is just the insert that you add inside the cup, and this way you can add more die cuts or other elements inside the cup, not only to the sides of it. Now I'm sticking the two shapes back to back, and I'm going to insert it in the center of the doily, then open up the tabs and stick them down. I'm going to attach one tab onto one side of the doily and another tab onto the other side. And now it's time to add the cup onto the card. So I'm going to apply some glue to the bottom of the doily, and I'm going to stick it down inside the card, lining up the cut edge of the doily with the edge of the pattern paper. Just like the pattern paper, the cup should not overlap the fold lines. Then I'm making sure everything is lined up nicely, and I will let the glue dry. This is how this construction works. You open up the card and you have a nice 3D image inside. I'm going to use a couple of fairy images as my focal image for this project, and I'm going to use the ones from the Teacup Fairies stamp set, also the part of the new collection. Here I have the fairy image stamped and colored with the colored pencils. I'd like to mention that there are matching dies, but the wings and the fairy are different dies, so if you want to use those matching dies, you have to stamp the wings separately and then die cut them. Here I used the masking technique to stamp the entire image, so this time I will be using the scissors to fussy cut the fairy. And by the way, it was my daughter who colored the fairy images, so there are two of us working on this project. Next, I'm going to trim down that image just a tiny bit so that it doesn't stick out of the card when it's closed. And then I'm going to stick that fairy onto that insert tab inside the cup. This second sit-in fairy is from the same stamp set, and it's also colored the same way with the pencils. This time I will be using the matching die to cut it out. Then I'm going to apply some glue, and this time I'm sticking down the fairy onto the outside of the cup, right in front of it. I will also be using the flowers and leaves from the same die set to decorate the teacup. This rose image here is a two-layer die. We have the lacy outline plus the plain background. All other images are single layer. This flower comes in 3 different sizes, and you can use it to layer and to create a fluffy flower, but since we have a pop-up card, I like to keep everything as flat as possible, so I will be using those die cuts separately. Besides, I like to think of this flower as periwinkle, which is a single layer kind of flower. Next, I'm going to attach a few leaves behind that rose image, and then I will be assembling the card. I am attaching that rose with the leaves to the front of the card, right next to the fairy, just using the liquid glue. And now I'm going to add all the remaining flower and leaf die cuts onto the project. I'm sticking them down to the tab inside the card, all around the fairies, to the front and to the back of the cup, just to fill in all empty spaces. And finally, I'm also going to attach some flowers and leaves horizontally right onto the doily in front of the cup and the fairies. And then I can call my card done. This is what the finished card looks like. We have you, me, and a cup of tea written on the card front, and then inside the card we have the illustration of this sentiment. Because we have used the double fold, we can fit a lot of elements inside, and the card is still folding down pretty flat. It can lay on the surface and it's not opening up by itself. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. I'm encouraging you to check out the entire new collection. The link is down below in the description box. Also, this Saturday, I'm going to publish another tutorial and share more ideas on how you can use the pop-up teacup die set, as well as some other products from the new collection. Have a fabulous day, and I hope to see you again on Saturday. Bye-bye.